So let me start our program by introducing the CEO of Global Strategy Group, John Sylvan, who will talk about the research he has done to inform how we think about communicating around the census. John is one of the most respected communication strategists in the country. He works for Fortune 50 companies, governors, senators, and congressional members. He's also a very committed New Yorker. We're proud to have him deeply involved in ABNY. So John's firm, at the very beginning, conducted a series of focus groups which have given us insight into how we should talk about the census, who are trusted messengers, and what roadblocks stand in our way. He was very kind to do it for at cost and be a volunteer moving forward. Ladies and gentlemen, John Sylvan.
Stephen is pumped. I've known Stephen a long time. Batshit crazy, puppies and kittens. Wow. All right. Thank you, folks. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Before I get going, I just wanted to thank a group of people who helped us on this important project. Firstly, Stephen Rubenstein again, and the ABNY team, led by Melva Miller, Angela Pinsky, and Morgan Perlman, and of course, our great co-chair, Steve Choi, and the New York Immigration Coalition. We couldn't have done any of this without you guys. And our goal was, frankly, very straightforward, challenging, but very straightforward. At the core of the research was a series of questions that we needed answers to and insights about. We began by digging deep into the challenges and the pain points that these people and their communities faced, in the hopes that we could make the case that participation in the census would alleviate some of these problems. And of course, we needed them to gauge what they knew. We needed to gauge what they knew about the census, what their reactions were to actually looking at the form, and how they most preferred to take it. Look, we knew going into the process that the big elephant in the room was the citizenship question. Thankfully, that's not an issue that we have to contend with anymore. And we needed to identify what would motivate people to participate. How do we get them juiced up like everybody in this room is juiced up to make this happen? And finally, who were the people that they trusted? Who were the messengers that could deliver our message most effectively? As I said, it was a challenging research assignment. The communities that were selected because they had historically lower rates of census participation than other communities. They were groups that, some of them, for example, the Dominican group was a group that had participated in the past at rather strong levels, but the citizenship question was going to be a particular obstacle for them. Again, thankfully, we don't have to contend with that right now. ABNY and the community partners recruited these groups, moderated them in language in each community, mostly in the community centers. Global Strategy Group provided the direction, the recruitment, and the moderation, and we wrote the guide, and we produced the findings using translated transcripts from a myriad of different languages. We had some amazing partners. Could never have gotten this done without this terrific group of people. And our key findings. The census isn't a totally foreign concept to most of these people, but it isn't something that many of them have participated in before. And it's not likely that they're going to participate in 2020 unless someone explains to them how it can benefit them, why it's important, encourages them to do it, and makes it clear that they can feel safe giving out personal information. So the messages that are most likely to work with these folks, we have to tell them that the government relies on the census to determine funding for state and local services. When you respond to the census, you are participating in a process that is going to help your community get its fair share of $675 billion per year, including funding for Medicaid, SNAP, Head Start, school lunch programs, Section 8, and a whole long list of very important programs that communities need to get through their daily lives. Second, the census is critical to families and their future, right? These are people, some of them who have come to this country, and the census is going to be a key to providing them and their children with education, with transportation, with schools, with affordable housing, all the things they need to get a good, strong start in life so that they can enjoy a prosperous and healthy future. Finally, these communities really want a physical location where they can go and learn more about the census, where they can ask questions of other people in their community, trusted leaders, folks that they can go to and ask questions before they take the census, and folks that they can talk to when they're actually filling out the form. They are very skeptical of participating on the phone because they think that the person on the other end of the phone might not be a legitimate representative, and they're very, very concerned about their personal information being stolen. And we found out that the good news is that most of them are willing to fill out the form and mail it in, and not surprisingly, younger folks are comfortable doing it on a computer and smartphone. So what are our recommendations? We have to position participation in the census in a very transactional way. Get counted, and your community gets more money. Specifically, we have to tie it to the issues that matter to them, the challenges that they are facing on a daily basis around low wages, around expensive rent and healthcare, overcrowded schools. So we need to position the participation in the census as a way to secure more federal funding for the community to alleviate and address the challenges they face. We need to educate this community on what the census is and what it's used for, because they are far from clear on that question. And again, we have to make them feel safe about taking the census. Even without the citizenship question, they're worried about government having their personal information. And given the limited resources that we have, we recognize and learned that it is incredibly important that we rely on the trusted community leaders that have been with these people throughout their daily lives. These are the folks who, if they encourage them and support them, are far more likely to participate than if not. And finally, we took a shot at drafting a message, an elevator pitch, 30 seconds, about what the census is and why it matters. Thank you, folks. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Alex Merceron, who's going to talk about the importance of messaging.
Beautiful room. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, John. My name is Alex Merceron. I am the Director of Communications Theory at Rubenstein. I also teach at Columbia University. I'm a faculty member in strategic communication there. And that's all to say that my role and my focus in both of those positions is to help people use research and the science of communication to message more effectively and persuasively. So before you hear from my colleagues about more specifics, I want to take a minute just to talk to you about some steps we can all take in approaching communication to be more effective in supporting Census 2020. Now, as both Stephen and John mentioned, there's been a ton of research. In December, we'll be providing a toolkit that people can use and take back to their organizations. But having that information is really just part of the challenge. when we're messaging, we're simply focused on transferring information from one person to another. But what we want to do with this campaign is strategic messaging, right? That's being deliberate, purposeful about that effort, and really galvanizing people around a common goal. We want to motivate, not just educate. And success in that is going to depend on trust and credibility in whoever's speaking. And that's where everyone in this room comes in. We need everyone in this room, as John mentioned, to insert their own voice in this campaign and help us personalize it and put it into terms that people care about. Right? Ultimately, focusing on the things people care about is what's going to make messaging more meaningful, persuasive, and ultimately make people act on it. So this really begins with a clearly defined and understood target audience. So the first step in our effort is really going to be to think about audiences in a different way. We want to think more deeply about who they are, how many of them there are, the different languages they speak, any other key demographics, age, location, but most importantly, what are the issues that they care about? And then it becomes a matching game, right? Tying the messaging into those things that already resonate with them. Because the better you understand and segment your key publics, the easier it is to tailor your messaging to fit them. Research on successful communication shows that the more relevant a message is to someone, the more likely they are to remember it, the more likely they are to act on it, right? We know this anecdotally, but the science supports this as well. So again, making messages relevant is where you all come in. We cannot do this without you. And that's the unique value that everyone can contribute to the Census 2020 campaign. Ultimately, the ask, right? We're not asking you to provide anything, as Stephen said, but your time. But the role that you're going to play is being the strategic storyteller for your own community. That means that we want you to personalize things in ways that make sense for you, right? Building on your own connections, your own relationships, your own lived experiences. By nature, humans are drawn to stories, right? Putting things in terms of personal narratives, speaking to people as individuals, both as members of communities, but also as individuals who have their own concerns, fears, issues, and challenges, makes messaging, again, more effective, right? Biologically, we respond differently to information when it's presented to us as a narrative versus just reciting a bunch of facts and figures and saying, hey, please remember to fill out the census. It's not enough to just say, hey, would you please remember to fill out the census? You have to say, hey, if you don't fill out the census, your kid's school funding might be cut. Our community was undercounted in 2010. If that happens again, we're at risk of losing even more, right? That's the essence of storytelling. Bring things to life and appeal to people's own individual self-interest. Right? So moving forward, we are here to help you with that, right? That's a big part of the strategic work that the agency will be available to support you in doing, crafting your own stories, and really adapting the goal to fit the needs of your communities and your audiences. Because to change minds, we have to be explicit about the change that we're trying to achieve and why we're doing it. We also need to simplify the messaging, although the implications of the census are complex. The messaging around it shouldn't be, right? We should try to aim for equal understanding among all members of our communities. We'll also work with you to help make messages more credible, and this is where the research that exists is going to be critical, right? Being able to weave in evidence to support all of the messaging that we're putting forward is essential to being accepted and having people act on it. And then there are the deliverables, right? We have to structure campaigns and let messages drive content. So whether you're creating press releases, doing social media outreach, having community meetings, we'll help you adapt the messaging to that channel and to the audience. And then we need to repeat these messages. So we'll need a bigger picture view of the campaign, both in terms of the reach, but also the frequency, right? Because repeating messages is what's going to really drive people to act over the course of next year. Research says that a message repeated 7 times over 30 days is more likely to achieve 90% retention. Again, 7 times in 30 days, 90% retention. So that should be the goal that we're all striving for. Getting the messages out, getting them out in a tailored, targeted, meaningful way, and then saying them often, right? Meeting people where they are, getting that message out as often as we can. So now my colleague Eva Benson is going to provide you with some specifics on what to say when we are dealing with our audiences. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Eva, and I work at Rubenstein. I work with a bunch of business clients, non-for-profit clients who all care deeply about the census. I'll talk to you about the building blocks of messaging, and then we'll go through a couple of real-life examples on how to use those. To just first give you a sense of how we arrived at this messaging, we didn't just make it up. Here's what we did. We started by interviewing stakeholders. Melva Miller and her team went around to some of you here and to businesses, to all around the city, and talked to people about messaging and why they care about the census. We used John's research that you just saw, and then in June, before the Supreme Court decision about the citizenship question, we worked with the city and the state, and again, with many of you in the room here, to come up with the best messaging to explain that being counted in the census is safe and critical, no matter the outcome of the citizenship question, Supreme Court decision. And a lot of what we learned then can actually be applied now to the general census messaging. We collected existing toolkits, more than 40 of them. The best of them will be on the Abney Census website, and you also have a few of them that you can take today already. Our Rubenstein in-house experts put together concise messaging, and we are now testing it out in the field with more than 400 New Yorkers in 3 different languages, and after that we are going to go and do focus group testing. I would like to give a special thanks to the Daniel H. Refson Foundation for generously underwriting this. Messaging is built on 4 pillars: the main message, the supporting message, evidence, anecdotes, and stories, and the call to action. Our main goal in messaging is to develop messaging that is simple and robust, that can be used in a 20-second conversation, or it can be used in a 20-minute conversation. First, we start with the main message. That's the statement that reflects the idea you must convey in every conversation. Second, you have a catalog of supporting messages. There are targeted messages on specific issues. They could be schools, Medicare, infrastructure, representation in Washington. Basically, those are the buckets of what's at stake. You here in the room, you know best what your audience responds to and what your audience is interested in. So you will be picking the bucket that you want to address. Third, evidence, anecdotes, and stories. Those are real life, sometimes personal, sometimes local examples that connect the census outcome to people's lives. And fourth, the call to action. Here in this one, it's pretty obvious. Get counted, fill out the census. Together, these form a platform that becomes the basis for all communications, for talking points, press outreach, printed materials, email messages, or social posts. And continuing with the rule of 4s, we made it simple today. Here's where we ended up, the messaging in 4 key words: money, jobs, power, and safety. These are the themes that crystallized as key when speaking about the census. We recommend that you think about the messaging in those 4 words. We are currently testing specific phrasing to those themes. For example, we're testing 10-minute survey versus short form, or we're testing whether it makes sense to talk about specific programs like Medicare and SNAP, or be more generic and talk about money in your pocket. And we're testing positive versus negative. Here's what we mean for each, regardless of the final word choices. Money. The 2020 census will help determine how much money we'll get for your blocks, our schools, and our playgrounds. The alternative, the 10-minute survey will determine how much funding New York will receive for programs like Medicaid, Head Start, SNAP, Child Care Plus. Jobs. The census helps decide what stores will open in our neighborhood and what jobs will come with them. Or, the census isn't just for the government. It also helps businesses decide where to go and bring jobs. Power. The census ensures that we have people fighting for us in Congress to get our community the funds it needs. Or the census ensures we'll have people fighting in our community and our rights in Washington. And finally, safety. Responding to the 2020 census is safe and secure. Federal law protects your information. The Census Bureau's access to personal information is extremely limited. That means there is no chance of anyone else knowing your information. To give you a couple of specific examples of how you would use this when you're out in the field, when you're talking to people. You always start with the top line message. That doesn't change. That's your bedrock that everything is built on. Then, based on who you're talking to, you select a specific path. Let's imagine you're talking to families with children. Let's imagine you're in Astoria, Queens. The important points to drive home will be money for schools. That's what your audience cares about. You lean in on the supporting message. In this case, if you're counted in the census, will help bring more federal funding to your local schools. And then you make it personal, and you make it local. You back it up with evidence. And that's the anecdote that you have thought of before you walked into the room, and you know that that's what you're going to use. So you'll say, the census matters for our local schools, PS 122 and PS 85. We have overcrowding issues. We need more teachers and staff. Kids cannot go outside for recess every day because there's not enough staff to supervise them. We need to count all our school children and also those under 5 because we have to plan ahead for the future. And don't forget, a second grader today will have graduated from high school 10 years from now when we have another chance to get counted. That's a direct impact on your local schools, PS 122 and PS 85. Another example, let's imagine you're talking to people in a senior home. You again start with the top line message, and then you use the supporting message, and then you explain it and you make it real. And possibly you offer help. So an example, you say you explain that this means that depending on how many seniors get counted in the census, a pool of money is allocated. And you say, please spread the word to your friends and make sure you all get counted. The census is online this year, or there's an option to fill it out online. That's a change from 10 years ago or 20 years ago when you last did it. It might be intimidating, it might be scary. We are here to help you fill out the census and call us to help you. And you always, always end with your call to action. Fill out the census and please get counted. Now I'll throw it over to Jamie Joyce, my colleague, our head of digital strategy, to talk to you about some of the channels that you can use to spread your message. Thanks.
Morning, everybody. Morning. So, building off the insights and the approaches that you've heard today, especially around messaging, it's important to think also about how and where to reach those audiences and achieve your goals. And in today's world, I don't think that's any surprise that we're going to be reaching people largely on digital channels and platforms. So that's what we're here to talk about. There we go. When it comes to digital media, the maxim strategy is what you don't do should be our North Star. And what that really means is that it's better to do a few things well than attempt to do lots of things and without the proper resources in place to be effective. I want to acknowledge there's definitely some rock stars in the room here who absolutely know this stuff probably better than I do. So bear with me. For those of you who know less, please be patient. I'll try to get through it. And also take a deep breath. I'm going to throw a lot at you, but we're just going to get started today, and then we're going to be working shoulder to shoulder now and in the coming weeks and months together. So that said, as we go forward together, I want to acknowledge also that every audience and organization is unique. And what that means is we're going to want to think through custom strategies and approaches to getting out the count that really lean into your strengths, account for your weaknesses, and drive measurable results that are going to give you the data you need to get smarter as you go along. The good news is there's lots of resources that we're going to be pointing you to today and in the months ahead that are going to make this job much easier. And with a high-level strategy and approach and action plan in place, you'll want to move on to focusing on your digital footprint, which is a really fancy way of saying the digital channels that you actually have access and control over. So let's talk about those. The first one is your website, your microsite, and your landing pages. These are really the ultimate destinations that you're going to be pointing people to for the most up-to-date and accurate information. In other words, this is going to be the center of your digital universe. So between now and in the new year, it'd be really time well spent to review your most popular web pages and online forums for ease of use, as well as to take a look at your landing pages to see how well set up they are to convert. And what I mean by convert is you're going to want to get people's emails, you're going to want to invite people to events, you're going to want to communicate things, get people to do things. Make sure that those pages are really organized and set up and are really easy and clear to look at. Now, the good news is there are tools to help you figure this out. So, how many of you in the room are familiar with these charts or know where they come from? That's a pretty good number. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, this is Google Analytics. And this tells you lots of things about where your traffic is coming from. So this could be media placements in the local community. These could be conversations that are happening on Twitter and how things are getting there. It tells you what kind of audiences are getting to your pages and what things they're finding most helpful. Now, the good news is if you're not familiar with Google Analytics, and this is something that's important to you, and I suspect it is, there are some free resources out there, up to and including getting certified by Google in an online training class. So we'll point you to a lot of these resources, and you can go a little deeper. So email. We love email. Email is probably the least glamorous channel out there, but it is the most effective channel, and it is the lifeblood, I think, of community-based organizations. The people on your list, by definition, are your biggest supporters. They're your biggest fans. They're the people most likely to spread your message. They're the most likely to show up at your events. They're your ambassadors. And the good news, too, is that email doesn't have to be boring. So let's make sure that we best position email to be used effectively to get out timely information, to drive up event turnout, to source volunteers, and generally to drive up participation in the count. Let's talk about your social channels. This is the very next place that you're going to want to focus your energy in advance of the big push into 2020. A few quick things that you can do between now and in the new year include the following. First, take a fresh look at your profile pages. So those are the actual profile pages that you have on Facebook, on Twitter, what have you. Make sure that the URLs that you want people to look at are updated. Make sure that your role in getting out the count is included in that short bio area that's represented there. If you have an opportunity, like in Facebook, to create contact information and other ancillary information, make sure all that stuff is up to date. Second, brush up on best practices in community management. Quick question for the group. How many of you know what the average person, based on lots of polling, what the average person expects in terms of a response? How quickly do they expect a response if they post something on social media? 1 hour. Now, let's be honest. For a lot of folks, that's a big ask, right? So we're going to need to manage people's expectations, but we're also going to have to be proactive and think about how we wargame that and plan for that going forward, because that is the expectation. Now is also the time to learn new skills. So I would suggest leveling up on things like creating thumb-stopping stories on Instagram stories, right? How do you use that? That's a great platform. It's where a lot of the attention eyeballs have gone in your local communities. If you're not familiar with Instagram stories, now is the time to get familiar. That's one example of many. In addition to that, do you know how to reach younger audiences on Snapchat? Quick question about Snapchat. How many of you know the average age of a Snapchat user in 2019? 18. They're voting age now. They were all in school a few years ago. Now they're graduating college. They're getting into college. They're voting. So when you think about Snapchat, don't think about children. Think about people who are new voters and people who are looking to begin their civic careers in earnest and take advantage of that. Now, when someone else talks about you on social media or talks about your organization using their own handles, not yours, for example, we call this earned social media. And it really makes sense to have tools in place so that you can listen and hear what people are saying about you, your events, the things, your leadership. And both for a couple of reasons. One, to be helpful. People are going to have questions, and you're going to want to jump into those conversations and add value. But secondly, you might want to identify people who are talking about you that have larger audiences. We call those folks influencers, right? And there are micro-influencers, there are macro-influencers, but certainly there are going to be people on an iterative basis who are going to talk about the work that you're doing, that have a platform. And if you know that they're talking about you, that represents an opportunity. One, you can lift up that message and retweet it or repost it to make sure more people see it. But you could also reach out to that person directly and ask how they can become a more formal ambassador to advocate for getting out the count on behalf of your local community-based organization. But you won't know that unless you're looking for it, right? Design and production. This is really about humanizing your story. Eva and Alex and others have talked a lot about messaging here today. Design and production is really what brings that story to life. So whether you're communicating through your website or email or social media or just simply texting to private groups on WhatsApp, it's important to creatively express those ideas using more than just the written word. High-impact memes, GIFs, social share graphics, and native content that break through the clutter and grab attention should all be used to drive a conversation and increase the likelihood that people share your organization's content. I know a lot of you in the room right now might be saying, but I don't have designers, I don't have video producers, what do I do? Well, the good news is tools like Animoto and Lumen 5 and Canva, these things honestly cost like teens of dollars a month to use. These tools make even someone who's never used Photoshop before feel like a content pro. Animoto and Lumen 5, for example, do you have a blog? It will scrape your blog and turn one blog post into a video that's optimized for every channel, and you can push that out and share it. Pretty great. Does it in like 30 seconds. Canva, social share graphics. You can mirror the font, you can mirror the colors of your organization so that it feels brand appropriate. There's lots of stock photography, you can create all sorts of interesting things, and you don't need a designer to do it. So regardless of your capacity and the types of internal resources you have, just know that these tools are available to you, and we will be working with you because some visual assets have already been created at a national level, and Abney and the team in this room are going to be providing some templated graphics and content that you can use that are more appropriate for New York City and more customized for the audiences in our own backyards. Now, digital advertising and audience targeting. One of the biggest advantages to running a Get Out the Count campaign on digital media is the ability to target audiences with high precision and end-to-end measurability. To do this, however, requires advertising. Why? Because Facebook's not free, right? These social platforms aren't free. When you post something and you use the quote-unquote free version of it and you don't put money behind it, very few people see it. Even a few years ago, when you would talk to Facebook representatives and you would say, what's your benchmark for content that I post? What percentage of the audience that's already following me, what percentage of those people actually see my content? They don't even have a benchmark. They didn't have a benchmark 3 years ago. They don't have a benchmark now. The point is that if you spend a lot of time creating messaging and spend a lot of time creating content, please make sure that we're allocating some resources to promote that content, even to the people who follow you, who have opted in, to ensure that they see it, and especially to net new audiences who aren't following you, because that's likely the only way they're going to see it. The good news, however, is that there's many low-cost ways to ensure that these messages get out there and make it to the people who would most benefit from hearing them. Facebook and Instagram are two obvious places to start. And there's lots of free courses and tools and videos out there to help get you started. But I would also challenge you to think about other platforms that may not be as intuitive or something you would think about right away. We, for example, are very bullish on audio. So you see icons up here for Pandora and Spotify and podcasts. There's a lot of brand studies that have shown that these platforms in particular are incredibly effective at making sure that messages stick. And a lot of times they come with the same targeting and price points as Facebook and Instagram, which, as you probably know, are really low. So in short, think outside the box. And now that I'm wrapping up, I also want to acknowledge that this really does feel like a lot to do in a short amount of time. But just get started. just get in there. And by doing some of these things now, day by day, know that we'll be here to continue to support you with more tools and assets and expert guidance, beginning today, of course, but really ramping up as we get into the new year with the pop-up. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to Melva.
So I know that seemed like a lot, but hopefully you guys were able to get some tips on how to craft messaging. Again, we will help do that in the pop-up space, what messaging means, as well as some digital tools for you to use.